Welcome back to the FITSNews studio for another edition of your Week in Review. I am decked out. My alma mater, University of South Carolina, Go Cox. Big game this weekend against Jacksonville State. I will be there with my brood, but I hinted at the end of last week's show that the Murdaughs would be back this week, and they are back in a big way, a major filing in that case. We're devoting this entire episode to it. In fact, our researcher, Jen Wood, going to join me here in just a second to talk about a bombshell filing from the defense in this case, which marks a major development in the legal fight on Alec Murdaugh's appeal. This story, again, it's been at the top of our radar for a long time. We've been the tip of the spear on the Murdaugh saga for a very long time, but this case continues to take twists and turns no one saw coming. Now, I'm going to sit down with Jen Wood to walk you through the ramifications of the latest filing in the Murdoch Murders crime and corruption saga. So as I mentioned at the outset, we are starting off with the Murdoch Murders crime and corruption saga, which is back in a big way this week. This story has been off the radar for the last few weeks, but it stormed back to the very front of our coverage as a huge motion was filed by the attorneys for Alec Murdaugh. And it's interesting, as we've covered this case, Murdaugh's defense attorneys, Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin, they seem to dominate this narrative when the case is outside of the courtroom. If you remember the run-up to Alec Murdaugh's big double homicide trial down in Walterboro, South Carolina, the defense was really driving the narrative. Obviously, during the trial, they lost control of that narrative. Murdaugh was soundly proven guilty in that case, convicted by a jury. But since those verdicts were handed down, once again, Murdaugh's defense attorneys have reclaimed the initiative in this case, and they appear this week to be cooking with gas. And I'm joined by our resident Murdaugh expert, FITSNews research director, Jen Wood. Jen, you are our Murdaugh encyclopedia, the heart and soul of our coverage. Thank you for sitting with me today as we try to make sense of these latest developments.
It's a lot. It continues to be a lot. You think they're done, and they keep coming.
Well, before you and I dive into this, and it's interesting, we've got some different views on this, which we're going to dive into here in a minute, on the latest bombshell filing from Murdaugh's defense attorneys. But before we get to this, let's kind of set the stage of how we got here. Obviously, Alec Murdaugh convicted of the murders of his wife and younger son back in March of this year, sentenced to life in prison by Judge Clifton Newman. Shortly thereafter, signaled his intention to appeal. But over the last few weeks, we've seen some developments. The appeals court, at Murdaugh's request, has stayed that appeal pending a circuit court hearing on allegations of jury tampering. Now, these allegations involve Colleton County Clerk of Court Becky Hill, but as we learned this week, they could also potentially involve as a witness Judge Clifton Newman. And because of that, and because of some things that Judge Clifton Newman has said publicly since the murder convictions, Murdaugh's attorneys are asking him to be taken off the case. Now, this was hugely controversial, Jen, generated a ton of response.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Judge Newman he's loved. He is, the epitome of judicial excellence in South Carolina. I think everyone grew to love him during the trial. I mean, the trial was crazy, but his calm demeanor, keen knowledge of the law, everything about him made the entire trial, as crazy as it was, seem normal. So, I mean, it was an honor to watch him preside over that trial. He was absolutely fabulous. I loved him. I think he was the right choice for that case. But I mean, I'm starting to think that Dick Harpootlian and Jim Griffin and team have a point.
Well, now hold on a second. I want to read this. Before we came on, I did a little tweet that you and I were going to be talking about this, and some folks were predicting what we might be saying. And one of the folks who responded said that they believed I would conclude that Judge Newman needs to recuse himself, but that you would argue against that. But that's not the way this is going to go, I don't think. But let's dive into this. The motion is actually filed before the South Carolina Supreme Court. And let's explain this real quick. The reason it's filed before the Supreme Court is that it was Chief Justice Donald Beatty back in September of 2021 who appointed Judge Newman to handle all of the Murdaugh cases, including the double homicide. So now it is before the Supreme Court whether or not he should be taken off. And Jen, walk us through the nuts and bolts of the case Murdaugh's lawyers are making against Judge Newman.
So what they filed is a writ of prohibition, and it's not something that is commonly filed. It's called a drastic remedy. It's similar to asking for an injunction. And it's typically only used when the person who's filing it has no other adequate means of relief. And in this case, the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Beatty appointed Judge Newman to this. So they couldn't simply file a motion in court and ask to have him recused.
Right. So he wouldn't be able to hear his own motion on his own recusal. It's got to go up the chain.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, they did send the letter, and that was in their filing as an exhibit. They sent a letter asking that he recuse himself. Obviously, the state disagreed with that, sent a response letter, and they did not hear back. So, I mean, to me, that is why they felt they had to go this route. So what they were, I mean, primarily, they were looking at the Judicial Code of Conduct. South Carolina, like all states, has a Judicial Code of Conduct that helps guide judges ethically and set standards for judicial ethics and conduct. And that is what they based their motion on. And yeah, it's startling when you see a judge as beloved and, you know, who I think is very, you know, he's
called
so
America's
much integrity.
Judge.
Right.
Everybody loves the guy. Everybody admired not only the job he did during the 6-week trial, but all of the very complicated motions leading up to it. I mean, he handled everything, you know, like you said, even keeled, with a great demeanor, with integrity, and also, as you noted, with a very sophisticated knowledge of the law, repeatedly correcting both prosecutors and defense attorneys on the finer points of their motions as they tried to position ahead of the trial. But Jen, let's talk about this code of conduct. It's comprised of these judicial canons. Is that right? And within these canons, there are standards that these judges are supposed to uphold. Is that correct?
Yes. And, you know, I've been doing a lot of research into the Office of Disciplinary Conduct in South Carolina. So I had been reviewing these quite intensely prior to this filing. So that's why I kind of had a clue where this was going. But, you know, it's, you know, it basically sets standards, and they really focused on a lot of what they were saying focus is on Judge Newman's bias. Which, I mean, they're good points. The first one is a judge shall disqualify himself or herself in a proceeding in which the judge's impartiality may reasonably be questioned, including but not limited to instances where the judge has personal knowledge of disputed evidentiary facts concerning the proceeding.
Okay, so now you're talking about the jury tampering allegations.
Right.
And the argument that Judge Newman is a witness to those and potentially one of the only witnesses.
Right, exactly. I mean, the jury, during the trial, the court staff shouldn't have a lot of contact with the jury. And the very little contact that was had with them was the clerk of court and Judge Newman. And there are clearly, when they go into this evidentiary hearing, they have some jurors who say that inappropriate comments were made to them by the clerk of court. Obviously, they're going to, the clerk of court, Becky Hill, is going to testify during this evidentiary hearing, and it will be disputed. And I'm guessing they have some of the other jurors who will testify and dispute the jurors that the defense is bringing forward. So these facts are heavily disputed.
So the first prong of the defense's motion that Judge Newman should be taken off the case and replaced with another judge, we'll talk about that in a minute, the replacement part of it. But the first prong is that he's a fact witness to disputes that he's going to then have to issue a judgment on. So you can't be both. You can't be a witness to the dispute and then rule on it. That's the argument.
Yeah, I mean, I think Judge Newman, seeing him in action for weeks, I mean, I think absolutely he could get up there. I feel like he could make an unbiased decision, but it's it says that he cannot, like the Judicial Code of Conduct says he cannot preside over that. He cannot be the fact finder. It is what it is.
Yeah, it's not up for debate based on that canon you just cited. But Jen, let's go through this. And also, it's interesting to note the defense attorneys in that letter to Judge Newman that you referenced, which apparently he air dried on. He just didn't even respond to it. But that letter essentially telling Judge Newman, we don't think you've done anything wrong. We just think based on this potential witness status that you're now in, you shouldn't rule on the case. But that's not the only thing raised in the filing, was it, Jen?
Right. No, it was not. So
let's talk about the second part of it.
They focused on three separate areas, sections of the canons. And the next one was a judge shall, let's see, let me make sure I get this one right. A judge shall perform judicial duties without bias or prejudice. So a judge shall not, in the performance of judicial duties, by words or conduct, manifest bias or prejudice, including but not limited to bias or prejudice based on race, sex, religion, national origin, disability, or age. So where they were going with that canon is the statements he made during the sentencing hearing.
And thereafter, correct? I mean, it wasn't just, I mean, we were obviously at the sentencing hearing. We heard very clearly Judge Newman telling Alec Murdoch that he would be haunted in his dreams by his victims, his late wife and late son, very clearly articulating a view of his guilt in the case. And in fact, talked about the crimes he'd committed and the horrific nature of them and the lies. And so it was very clear during that sentencing that Judge Newman was articulating views of Murdoch's guilt. That's not really uncommon, though, is it, Jen?
No, I mean, I've heard a number of sentencing hearings where the judges, say, give a statement prior to handing down the sentence. It happens all the time.
Well, stick a pin in that, though, and come back to the other examples. That wasn't the only time he articulated views on Murdoch's guilt, was it?
No, it was not. He articulated views on his guilt in interviews following the trial. After the conclusion, right, on the Today Show, at his alma mater, Cleveland State, in a podcast. And, I really enjoyed hearing from Judge Newman all of these instances because, you don't hear from judges often. It was, and I missed his voice. but, looking at the canons after, judges are not supposed to talk about cases that are pending.
All right, so we've established he's clearly said these things. There's no denying that. It's irrefutable, and we've established the statute refers to this as a pending case. So, I mean, I guess, Jen, if this is an instant replay, I mean, there's indisputable evidence. Am I right?
Yeah, there's indisputable evidence. I don't like it. I don't like that there's indisputable evidence, but it's, not every state in their Code of Judicial Conduct addresses interviews given by judges, but South Carolina does, and it's very clear.
Well, and I'm going to push back just a little bit more on this because obviously, I wrote a column this past weekend that a lot of people got pissed off because it did call for Judge Newman to recuse himself. But in that column, I pointed out that I felt on a personal level that despite all the comments he's made, despite this bias that he's demonstrated, I felt the man still had a level of integrity that he would be able to set that aside and make a fair ruling based on the law and the arguments as a trier of fact. I mean, do you agree with that? Am I right there or wrong there?
I think Judge Newman, yes, I think he could sit and listen to the evidence in the jury tampering allegations. I think he could be impartial. I think he could be unbiased. I think he could make a fair decision. But
well, isn't that the standard?
It is the standard, but if he hears it and decides that there is not enough to warrant a new trial, there is no other, according to the filing, effective legal remedy to vindicate his right. So this is
Right.
it.
You can't unring the bell, I think the
Right.
defense
Is exactly
said,
what they
right.
said. So, I mean, I think Alex Murdaugh is guilty as heck.
Well, we all do. Oh,
I think
absolutely.
he's where he belongs, but I also think that we have got to have a unbiased, fair judicial system for people who are going through trials, going through court cases, criminal cases. It's scary when it isn't fair. I
mean, I guess it's the concern that, okay, we've got allegations of prosecutorial misconduct during the trial. Again, I don't know whether there was. I've never seen it proven, but certainly Sled was not necessarily the star of the trial. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And there were questions raised about that investigation and the integrity as it related to some key pieces of evidence that ultimately weren't introduced. You know, the bloody shirt that apparently didn't have any blood on it. I mean, what a fiasco. But then we've got the allegations of jury tampering.
Which Sled investigated.
Right, right. And if we were to add on top of that questions about whether the judge hearing this critical motion, I mean, this is the motion for the new trial. I mean, this is the ball game for Alec Murdaugh. I mean, this is a huge deal. Yeah, I mean, I guess I can see your point. While we both believe Judge Newman could absolutely put his biases aside, it really doesn't matter when you look at the canons, and then when you look at that danger and the perception of it all. I mean, what a mess. I mean, this case, Jen, it just makes your head hurt sometimes. I mean,
it's just nonstop insanity.
Well, let's talk about the consequences of this decision. Obviously, the Supreme Court was given two requests by the defense. Number one, as you mentioned, that writ of prohibition, asking them to take Judge Newman off the case and put another judge
and not
on
just this case, any future cases.
That's right. All the financial crimes charges. And the clock is ticking too, because Judge Newman, as we know, is 2 months away now from retirement. So that financial crimes trial originally scheduled for later this month in Beaufort. So the clock is ticking on this financial crime side, but also Murdaugh's attorneys have requested a evidentiary hearing on the jury tampering allegations. So Judge Newman now in a position where there's two major cases coming his way. And Jen, as we're discussing on this call, in this conversation, he's got a real tough choice ahead of him. What do you think happens here, Jen? Do you think he takes himself off? Do you think the court takes him off? I mean, what's your prediction here, how this unfolds?
Judge Newman was appointed solely by Chief Justice Beatty, not by the entire Supreme Court. And they put this motion in front of the entire Supreme Court. So all 5 justices will be reviewing it. I think there's a good chance that they could choose another judge. For me, the probability is high.
I agree. In fact, we've already heard former Chief Justice Jean Toll as a possible replacement for Judge Newman as this thing moves down the pike. Obviously, she's a veteran judge, spent several years as the Chief Justice on the Supreme Court, several years before that as an associate. She's very experienced, although some would argue that she is very tight with that legal community of which Alec Murdaugh was, again, such a prominent member for so long. So there will be some questions there. Let's play this forward, Jen. What happens if they get a different judge, one who might not have been towing the line as it relates to holding the Murdaughs accountable, and we get one that goes the other direction and we end up with a new trial? Is that going to be a situation where people question the integrity of the system?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't really have a good answer for that. I mean, if we were to get a new judge, they decide that there is a new trial, we're going to have to go right back through that admissibility stuff, the prior bad acts, the financial crimes, because, Dick and Jim don't want that in.
Well, they don't. Here's the other thing. I don't think the Supreme Court justices want those admissibility decisions to be part of permanent law moving forward. And in fact, I think, I'm just speculating here, but I think some of them might view this drama with the jury tampering as a way to say, hey, you know what, let's redo this so that those admissibility decisions that Judge Newman made are not binding precedent. And to be clear, I don't think Judge Newman made any errors of the law in admitting that information. I do think he was correct in saying that the defense opened the door to a lot of it. But I also know that there are a lot of judges in South Carolina who are not wild about those admissibility decisions becoming precedent in cases across the state.
And that's what will happen if it goes to the Court of Appeals and they use that as, their standard, that what they're asking. It's going to go to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals is going to rule on it. Obviously, however they rule, it's going to end up to the Supreme Court. And the rulings that they make become case law. They become things that get cited in future cases. And I'm not entirely sure that the Supreme Court wants to set that precedent. I agree with you.
So here we are. We're having this conversation, you and me. We've been covering this case from the beginning. We're huge fans of Judge Newman. Again, I sat through almost every pretrial motion, sat through every day of that 6-week trial. The man distinguished himself at every turn. And so let's talk about the reaction to this, because we've been hearing from some voices in this debate, some shrill voices, I guess we'll say. Yep. There's this zero-sum game at work. Once again, there are people who view this case as sort of a team sport, not what it is, which is an effort to get to the truth and get to justice and get to fairness, even for just a horrific person like Alec Murdaugh. I mean, again, say what you will. We've said more than anyone else about the man. His right to a fair trial is something that we should all support, no matter what we think of him and what he's done, the horrific crimes he has committed, again, of which I don't think any of us have any doubt. And also, let's be clear about something else. I don't think there's any doubt he'd be convicted again. I don't think there's any doubt.
You don't?
No, I don't. I mean, well, you tell me. You seem to think there might be.
I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. I completely agree with you. This is not a zero-sum game. You can think Judge Newman has integrity. You can think he did a great job. You can think he's a really good judge. But you can also think,
a good person.
Right, and a great person. But you can also look at it and look at the facts that have been presented and say, you know what? I think they may have a point. I think there's a point here.
I think they have a point. I mean, I think
they do.
You look at those canons, and I got to tell you,
I was like, oh.
I got to thank you for your work. By the way, your report that you filed on this with Callie Lyons, available on FITSNews.com. That's a subscription-only piece, by the way. So if you haven't subscribed to FITSNews.com already, you're going to want to do so to go through Jen Wood's amazing point-by-point recap. She goes through every single one of the judicial canons and explains how they apply to this particular case, specifically to Judge Newman. Just an incredible piece of journalism, Jen. But once again, I want to go back to this because we're doing that kind of work. We're putting all that out there, letting folks decide. We're having this highbrow discussion of it. But so often, this story, we get these shrill voices coming in, and it's like, oh, you're attacking Judge Newman. You're attacking America's judge. No, we're not.
Dick and Jim may not be the most likable guys, but they're doing their jobs, and they're doing it well. And you know what? If I were ever going to need a defense attorney, I would want them to do as good a job as Dick and Jim have done. They've done a good job, and that's their job. You cannot attack them for doing their job, and you can't attack them for looking at this objectively and saying, you know what, I don't think Judge Newman should be the person to hear this going forward. They have a good point.
I mean, we're in agreement on that. And again, when I wrote that column back on Saturday a week ago, I knew it was going to be controversial. I knew it was going to piss people off. But it is the right thing to do. I mean, the man has articulated opinions in contravention to the canons of judicial conduct. He simply has done that. You're absolutely right. In fact, you have argued he may be in violation already. And so it doesn't matter at that point whether we think he's a good guy. It doesn't matter at that point whether we think he could put all that aside and still rule impartially. It doesn't matter at that point what we think. What matters is the law.
Right. It is what it is. I mean, I was reading through that petition again today, and they had a quote from Thurgood Marshall in there. It said, "Rules is rules, even in circumstances where it seems they do not matter." And they're right. And this does matter. This matters a lot.
Well, and it matters not just in this case, but also moving forward. And I think this is a good thing. I think moving forward, we're going to see a lot less commentary from the bench in sentencing. In fact, I don't understand it. If I'm a judge and a jury convicts a guy or a girl or whoever, and they bring them in, I'd listen to all the testimony and at the sentencing hearing, and then I'm going to very simply say, I sentence you to this, period. See ya.
Yeah. I mean, the sentencing guidelines say this. This is what I've chosen.
Yeah.
I mean, they could say, I've chosen this because you killed 2 people with a gun. It was premeditated. But it doesn't have to be because, I think you should have gotten the death penalty, which he did mention.
Yeah, Judge Newman did say that. He said that that people had been given the death penalty for less than what Alec Murdaugh did.
By his family.
Yeah.
So
yeah, by his own family.
Yeah, I mean,
what a story.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot.
What a story. Jim Wood, can't thank you enough, not only for the work you've done researching this, you and Callie Lyons, our researcher who works with you on this stuff, but also just these perspectives and these views and just talking this through. I mean, I think so many people, as I've said, it's a team sport. It's a zero-sum game. They're more interested in scoring points and attacking people over this stuff. I appreciate you being somebody who is simply focused on finding what's right and pursuing what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. You're doing that in this case, Jen, and it's a true credit. Your work on this story, just wonderful journalism.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working on it and working with you.
Well, we've got a lot more Murdoch madness to cover. Obviously, we will have an outcome on these motions filed by the defense at some point soon. And once we get those decisions, at that point, the stage will be set for the battle over a new trial for Alec Murdaugh. Will he get one? Will he not get one? We've obviously weighed in on everything leading up to that. Next time we talk, Jim, we'll have to sit down and talk about, does he deserve a new trial?
Right.
But we'll save that for the next show. Jim Wood, thank you so much. Appreciate your work on this. All right, so that is a wrap for this week's edition. We wanted to keep it very focused on this major Murdoch development, but over the last few weeks, we've had a ton of big stories on FITSNews, and so if you haven't already subscribed, we are working every day on stories large and small to bring accountability to the Palmetto State and beyond. So if you haven't already, please like and subscribe us here on YouTube. If you're a regular viewer, that'll help us get to that next level. But also, more importantly, please subscribe to FITSNews.com, where you can support independent, unapologetic journalism that's focused on the truth, not anybody's agenda. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time on your Week in Review.